So thank you very much. I'm going to now turn to the other end of the life course and talk about the Hertfordshire Cohort Study, which is, as you've heard, another of the key cohorts that we have in Southampton. So I have been working with this particular cohort study for over 20 years now. So it's a subject very close to my heart, but I'm going to just share with you a brief overview just to explain the sorts of data that we have and how you can access those data. So the origins of the Hertfordshire Cohort Study are like other cohorts. David Barker, the late David Barker, as you know, really proposed the initial DOHAD hypothesis that led to a need to identify cohorts where we had information on early life and later health outcomes. And unlike SWS, where women were followed from actually preconceptually, then through pregnancy, and then their children were followed up, in Hertfordshire, the aim was to actually identify people who had already reached adulthood, because we were interested in studying the links between growth in early life and the common adult diseases, things like diabetes, hypertension, and of course, musculoskeletal disease. So over probably the last 30 years, you know, the work that was begun by David has now, of course, been taken over by Cyrus Cooper, who now directs our centre, that you see in this picture here. And the way it worked when David first proposed this work was a few lucky research assistants got to travel the country looking for records where we had information on early life. And what they actually found in Hertfordshire, in a basement, in this photo that you see here, are some incredible birth ledgers shown here. And the origins of these birth ledgers are from a group of midwives and health visitors who visited women who had just given birth in Hertfordshire at the start of the last century, to visit the women, and more particularly their babies, because there were a lot of concerns around that time that children weren't being, or newborns weren't being adequately looked after, I suppose, really, through infancy and childhood, in order that they might develop good adult health. So it was proposed that there would be a group of midwives and health visitors who would visit these women and support them. And that's what these women did in Hertfordshire. And they recorded those visits in these ledgers. And these ledgers were unbelievably discovered in Hertfordshire in a basement in the 1980s. And those records were computerized and then actually matched to the NHS Central Registry to identify individuals who were detailed in those ledgers and then could still be traced as alive and living in Hertfordshire. And this really is the origin of the Hertfordshire Cohort Study. This is how we incepted our cohort. So what would happen, obviously, and this flow diagram just really demonstrates how the process worked. Live births were recorded in the ledgers. They were matched and sent to the NHS Central Registry for tracing. Of that number, about a third of those individuals were identified as being alive in Hertfordshire and sent to the FHSA for GP details. The majority, about 80% of those, were indeed registered with a Hertfordshire GP. And then of those, a little under 50% then were visited at home and attended for clinic visits. So you can see the sort of the attrition at each stages, but just to sort of come back to a point that's already been made in this discussion, obviously we were very mindful as we went through this process that there could well be a selection bias in terms of the characteristics of the study participants who actually helped us by attending our clinics and allowing us to visit at home. So we were quite careful to try and confirm that the individuals who were helping us were actually representative of the wider UK population, and certainly at baseline that appeared to be so. So what did we actually do? Well, 3,000 men and women agreed to a visit at home and then to a clinic visit, and that's what happened in these different study sites. So back in the 1990s, we set up a range of mobile clinics where people who'd already allowed a home visit by one of our research nurses attended a study visit, and there we collected information on anthropometry. We took blood tests, including genetic sampling. We asked them to complete dietary data to bring to their clinic visits, and we measured initially things that included cardiac outcomes, ECGs, respiratory outcomes, including lung function tests, but also a particular focus on musculoskeletal health. So I just put this slide up really just to illustrate the phases of the Hertfordshire Cohort Study. And when I talk about the Hertfordshire Cohort Study, I think I should probably clarify, although we identified records from the 1920s onwards, the Hertfordshire Cohort Study, which is the study that I'm really talking about today, refers to a quite specific time frame, and that's men and women born in Hertfordshire between 1931 and 1939. So everyone that I'm talking about was born in that time. And really, I put this slide up not for you to sort of look through each line in detail, but just to make the point that we have been back to visit this population many times over the years. So we have a wealth of data available. And as I'll come to in a bit, because it can be quite confusing, I think, trying to completely understand what's been collected at each time point, I'd really reinforce, we really welcome informal emails and applications to just discuss with us whether we've got the kind of information that might be helpful for you, because it is quite convoluted, the different processes. And to give you just some sense of the sort of information that we have, it goes right through from questionnaires, including dietary data. We have blood samples at baseline, including genetic samples, right through to a subset who have actually had muscle biopsies taken from their quadriceps and their thighs. So some people have been unbelievably generous with their time and their contribution to the study. So with that, I have to say particular thank you to, all our participants who have helped us so much with this. And here you see the study team that actually collected a lot of the baseline data. So we had a team of research nurses and research doctors who helped us with the initial face-to-face visits. So I'm a rheumatologist. As you've heard, Cyrus Cooper's a rheumatologist, so it probably won't be surprising to you to hear that we've had a particular focus on musculoskeletal outcomes as the study has evolved. So we have x-rays of hips and knees. We have a lot of muscle and bone data collected at different time points. So initially we have DEXA scans and body composition data associated with that. But we've also got some really beautiful scans from, this is a high-res PQCT, and this is the PQCT machine. And many people may not be familiar with high-res PQCT technology. It's sort of quite unusual and really exciting technology to have, but it basically gives us access to virtual bone biopsy data, so we can look at trabecular and cortical bone compartments of the radius and tibia. So I'm just going to give a couple of very brief examples of the sorts of things that we've been doing recently in Hertfordshire. I could talk for many hours about the different studies, but what I was hoping to do today was really just give you a little bit of a sense of some of the work that we've been doing recently and signpost you to how you can sort of see what we've got available. So The NAPA study, physical activity in older adults, is actually a randomized controlled trial that we've been doing in Hertfordshire in our older participants, that looks to see whether healthy conversation skills can impact levels of physical activity and nutrition in that cohort. So this work has been led by two researchers. So Ilse Bloom is a postdoctoral nutritionist, and Jean Zhang is a rheumatology trainee doing her PhD with us. And what they were doing, just as COVID hit, was completing the baseline study, whereby they were visiting participants at home, doing physical performance tests after completing a range of questionnaires. And for the intervention group, obviously beginning the journey of healthy conversation interventions as conversations with people that were then follow-up phone calls over the year. So we were very fortunate in that as COVID struck, we were just coming to the end of our baseline data collection. But like many other people in closer and working just in clinical research globally, we obviously had to pivot at speed. It became apparent that face-to-face follow-up visits were going to be very difficult. And actually for our follow-up phase, which was completed a couple of months ago, we've actually gone to questionnaire data and relied on accelerometry that we've posted out. But with every difficulty, I suppose, comes opportunity. And the only case study that I wanted to just highlight very briefly was this work that we were able to springboard off the NAPA study, that looked at how the older adults in Hertfordshire have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, or at least the initial phases of it, because these data were collected last year. So what we did when we, as we came to the end of the baseline collection, was secured ethics to actually go back and contact people by telephone and ask if they'd be willing to have a phone interview about the impact of COVID on their well-being, their nutrition, their physical activity, you know, all the things that you might be interested in, as well as specifically how they felt about the messaging around the pandemic and access to things like smartphone technology and the internet, things that, you know, I think we've come to rely on quite a lot over the last 18 months. I don't have time to go through the results, but the initial results, as you see, were presented at a closer blog that was published in December 2020. And the only thing that I would say really in summary is what it really highlighted to me, other than the wonderful opportunity that we had to be able to do this work as part of our longitudinal study, was just the diversity and the impact on what you might imagine would be quite a homogeneous population. There was huge disparity in people's experiences. And I personally found that fascinating, and we're taking that work forward. So I'm just going to say just a couple of things about some of the other work. So one of the things that we were keen to do in Hertfordshire was actually look at descendants of our original cohort members. So I mentioned that the HCS group were all born between 1931 and 1939, and the recurring theme over the years has been an interest from their families, from their children and their grandchildren. And back a few years ago, we thought that it would be really nice to actually take this work forward. So we actually incepted an intergenerational cohort, whereby we asked for permission to contact the children and the grandchildren of our initial cohort members. So this slide really just summarizes those data that we've collected. You can see that actually we sent out postal questionnaires to just over 1,000 individuals and got 712 back, made up of a mixture of children and grandchildren. And obviously we have smaller numbers where we have all three generations represented. But of that group where we have 3 generations represented, we've also actually invited them to attend the clinic, which they've done, again with a specific focus on bone health. So we've got DEXA and PQCT data in that group. So I don't have time to go through all the details of what data are available, but I just wanted to sort of signpost a couple of things. This is the HCS website, and I'd encourage you to go to that website to get a sense of the data that are available. And also, obviously, you know, the Closer Discovery will give you information. The other really helpful source of information, I think, is this paper that was published a couple of years ago. This is an incredibly encyclopedic and clear run through of what we've collected up to that point, led by Holly Siddle, who's one of our senior statisticians. And I'd encourage anyone who's interested to go there. Just very briefly, I'll show you the data access process. It's very, very similar to what Janice has already mentioned for SWS, but to reiterate, what I'd really encourage is just an initial contact. That's my email address. You're very welcome to contact me or Cyrus just to discuss whether we've got the sort of data that might be of interest to you. And then we have some paperwork in a very similar way to SWS that we can just walk you through, but that's not supposed to be onerous. And we obviously try to help as much as we possibly can do. So in closing, just Hertfordshire would not have been possible without a huge amount of work from a number of people. I can't thank the Hertfordshire participants enough. We've got an absolutely fantastic study team. And of course, we're very, very grateful to our funders for all their support over the years.